It began so softly, far too softly for the shock it was about to unleash. In the grey hush just after sunrise on a bitter December morning, while London still hid beneath a thin sheet of icy white, a single understated sentence appeared on the official Buckingham Palace. No grand announcement, no gleaming carriages pulling up, no heralding trumpets echoing through the courtyard. Just one discreet line slipped between routine updates. And yet that lone sentence? It detonated like a bomb. Phones jolted awake. Editors practically snapped to attention. Morning show anchors exchanged that "hold on, this is big" look, because that one quiet line wasn't a formality at all. It was the monarchy finally breaking its silence on the two most dissected, debated, and mythologized royal children of the modern era, Archie and little Lilibet. For years, the whispers multiplied, rumors twisted into legends. People traded theories like contraband, imagined timelines, hushed speculation, stories stitched together out of shadows, secret christenings, missing portraits, supposedly buried documents. You name it, someone swore it was true. Some believed the palace was hiding a storm behind velvet curtains. Others insisted Harry and Meghan were shielding the kids like fugitives from a world too hungry for chaos. And then there were the conspiracists, the channels and forums that turned dust specks into scandals, and every half-lit image decoded messages. But that December dawn sliced through it all. Frost still clung to the gates like silver armor. The sun had barely lifted its weary head. And for the first time ever, Buckingham Palace spoke plainly, unmistakably, about those children. And believe me, this wasn't a casual update. Every syllable, every pause, every carefully measured comma was intentional, polished until it gleamed, sharpened until it could cut. Behind that serene royal phrasing simmered years of unspoken conflict, strained moments between William and Catherine, Anne's curt warnings echoing in hallways, and Camilla's cool, calculated restraint. This was never just a story about two royal children. It was about whether the monarchy itself could withstand a world where rumors outran facts and whispers traveled faster than royal mail. Because the real beginning wasn't that subtle line on a website. Not even close. This saga started years earlier, with quiet. A silence so heavy it felt intentional. When Archie entered the world, the public braced for the usual royal spectacle, the hospital steps polished, cameras lined like soldiers, proud parents presenting the newborn bundled in royal white. But the Sussexes didn't follow the script. No staged moment, no shudder-filled debut, just a written announcement, brief and restrained, followed by an impenetrable blackout. And when Lilibet was born across the ocean, California sunlight instead of London clouds, the pattern returned. A single statement of happiness, then utter stillness. In a family built on tradition, ceremony, and carefully choreographed appearances. That silence was a flare shot into a moonless sky. It grabbed attention. It stirred confusion. And in a digital age where the slightest gap becomes a rabbit hole, the public began stitching their own narrative. And did they ever stitch? Every missing picture morphed into proof. Every pause became evidence. People dissected reflections, measured jawlines, matched lighting angles, mapped out timelines like forensic analysts. The internet transformed into a colossal, chaotic royal crime board. Within palace walls, though, no one was laughing. It wasn't entertainment, it was a crisis. Charles, newly stepping into the weight of the crown, clung tightly to old-world principles. Silence, he insisted, was the fortress. Dignity, he believed, came from withholding, not explaining. But William, he saw the storm forming long before anyone else felt the wind shift. He understood exactly how fast a spark could become a digital inferno. And Catherine, for her, this was personal in a way that cut deeper than protocol. To her, children, any children, were sacred ground. The idea that Archie and Lilibet's names were being tossed around online like plot twists in a tawdry drama shattered her. She didn't sugarcoat her frustration either. She looked Charles in the eye and said, "If we don't speak the truth ourselves, the world will invent its own." And Camilla? She was the chess player in the room, always calculating, always cautious. She feared that one official word could backfire, turn embers into an explosion, fuel the hysteria instead of easing it. So the palace waited and waited until that patience quietly twisted into peril. Because silence may have shielded monarchs centuries ago, but silence in the age of algorithms is a weapon that backfires. By the first week of December, the danger was undeniable. The the rumors had grown teeth. The earliest alarm dropped onto William's desk in the form of a stark briefing from the palace's digital analysis team. What had started as scattered fringe chatter had mutated into a full-blown viral beast. Thousands of posts, elaborate threads, faux investigation, comment sections boiling with suspicion. Some of it was disturbingly persuasive. Edited timelines, selective photos, confident narrators swearing the palace was hiding a truth too dark to name. But the most chilling detail? It wasn't teenagers or anonymous internet sleuths pushing the narrative anymore. The data showed the wildfire was being fueled by older generation, the very backbone of royal loyalty, the people who had spent decades believing in the crown without question. They felt bewildered, unsettled, even wounded. They couldn't grasp why there were no portraits, no blessings, none of the rituals they grew up expecting. To them, the quiet didn't feel respectful, it felt like concealment. And Catherine sensed it too. One evening, while sorting through documents for her charity projects, an aide handed her a thick bundle of press clippings. But these weren't the usual rumor-filled tabloids. These were serious opinion pieces, pointed, demanding answers, questioning the children's standing within the royal family. Why hasn't the palace clarified? Why all the secrecy? The headlines hummed with suspicion, and Catherine felt a chill sweep through her. In that moment, she understood the truth. What began as chatter had hardened into a challenge to the monarchy's integrity and recognized the danger just as clearly. One night, she strode into Charles's study, the fire snapping behind her, and dropped a printout of a viral thread onto his desk. "They're speaking about those children like theories, not like human beings," she said sharply. Charles stared at the page, the weight of realization sinking in. Their silence hadn't protected anyone. It had created a creature with a life of its own. But the final breaking point didn't come from editors or even from Anne's fierce argument. It came from the palace's own staff. At walkabouts and public appearances, aides started overhearing questions drifting from the crowds. Ordinary, polite voices asking things like, "Are Archie and Lilibet officially acknowledged? Will they ever appear with the others? Do they hold titles?" When William read the internal briefing, he felt something heavy turn in him. "We've let this spiral beyond control," he murmured to Catherine that night, their voices low beneath the warm lamp glow. "They're only children," she whispered back. "They shouldn't have to bear any of this." And that was the moment the decision crystallized. The palace would finally speak. But even she couldn't look away anymore. Headlines were now accusing the palace of participating in the chaos, claiming their silence wasn't dignity, but confirmation. International papers even hinted the crown itself questioned Archie and Lilibet's legitimacy. That was the line that couldn't be crossed. When the emergency meeting finally convened at Windsor, the moment felt ripped straight from a prestige royal thriller. Charles sat at the head of the table, exhausted yet resolute. William's expression was set like stone, Catherine calm but visibly fierce, and stiff-armed, ready to fight. Camilla arrived last, sweeping the room with that sharp, assessing stare that could cut marble. Charles began quietly. "We're facing a crisis born not of wrongdoing, but of misinterpretation." Catherine leaned in, voice firm. "Then let's correct the misinterpretation." Camilla fired back without hesitation. "If we answer every rumor, we appear weak." William didn't blink. "This isn't about rumors. It's about truth and about children." And gave one solid nod. Silence isn't grace anymore. It's abandonment. Around and around they went, tradition weighed against reality, restraint against responsibility, until Charles finally lifted his hand. "Draft the statement," he said. With those 3 words, the royal narrative shifted course. Night draped itself over London like a heavy velvet curtain, and the palace glimmered softly beneath the golden glow of its gate. The world had no clue that behind those ancient walls, the monarchy was preparing to release a message that would freeze millions of voices, at least for a breath. They understood exactly how massive the storm had become, and they were finally prepared to step straight into it. Inside the palace, the tension hung so heavy it felt almost physical. Staff hurried through the corridor, trading hushed updates. Advisors combed through the draft again and again, scrutinizing punctuation, spacing, even capital letters, because a single misplaced phrase could ignite another week of digital mayhem. Charles reread the statement in absolute silence, the lamplight carving deep shadows across the exhaustion etched into his features. Catherine reviewed it as well, feeling her chest loosen for the first time in months. It wasn't defensive. It wasn't sentimental. It was simply honest. At last, the truth was being spoken without disguise. When the alert finally went live, the world seemed to hold its breath. Phones buzzed like a swarm. News anchors abruptly cut off mid-sentence. eyes widening as breaking news flashed across their screens. The palace had spoken, unmistakably and with calm authority, confirming that Archie and Lilibet were legitimate members of the royal family, fully recognized, fully protected beneath the crown. The statement gently reminded the public that children, especially those born into a spotlight they never asked for, deserved care, not cruelty. It was clear, concise, and quietly thunderous. Within minutes, the global media erupted. Cameras swiveled toward Buckingham's ornate gate. Reporters clustered beneath dripping umbrellas as the fog thickened and flashes bounced off the icy pavement. Broadcasters who had spent months dissecting rumors suddenly stumbled through their scripts, scrambling to recalibrate. For the first time in a long time, the palace had seized the narrative back into its own hands, and the impact rippled across the world like an earthquake. Some analysts called it painfully overdue. Others said it was something the palace had never dared to do in its entire history. And the public responded with a whirlwind of disbelief, guilt, and stunned admiration. The older generation, the very crowd that had unknowingly fed the digital frenzy, felt a strange sort of relief wash over them. Many confessed they had let doubt creep in too quickly, letting silence turn into suspicion. It wasn't outrage anymore. It felt like the entire nation finally exhaled after years of holding its breath too tight. Across the ocean in California, Harry and Meghan were reading the same line. The statement wasn't an apology, not even close, but it carried something they hadn't expected to feel: recognition. For so long, their children's place in the royal narrative had been left blurry, suspended in uncertainty. And now, for the first time, it was carved into the official record for the whole world to witness. Meghan felt tears gather, tears born from long-awaited validation. "They're not invisible anymore," she murmured softly. Harry stood beside her, his expression heavy but hopeful. Whatever fractures existed between him and his family, this moment offered at least a flicker of healing. By the next dawn, newspapers from London to Los Angeles plastered the story across their front pages. Some read, "Palace ends years of speculation." Others declared, "Royal children formally acknowledged." The storyline shifted completely overnight, like a curtain being ripped open. And the irony? After years of suffocating silence, all it took was a single, unwavering paragraph to bring the storm crashing down. Even the monarchy's fiercest opponents reluctantly admitted this was one of the most open, human gestures the crown had made in a generation. But within the palace walls, emotions churned like a storm that hadn't quite passed. William felt steady yet unsettled, watching not only the headline, but the pulse of public reaction, the way the conversation was shifting hour by hour. For the first time in ages, he saw warmth coming from groups who had long grown icy toward the royals. Older supporters especially left comments like, "At last, the palace has spoken." That's when he understood this wasn't just about two children. It was about earning back trust that had quietly slipped away. Catherine felt it even more deeply. She wasn't thinking about analytics or approval curves. She was thinking of two small children, Archie and Lilibet, whose names had been tossed around online like pieces in a cruel game. The idea that they'd someday grow up and read those twisted stories made her chest tighten painfully. At least now, she whispered to William, "They'll know someone tried to shield them." She didn't dwell on sentiment. It was necessary, long delayed, finally done. The next morning, she told her aides exactly that. To her, the message was simple. This was the monarchy correcting a mistake it should never have let linger. She admired William and Catherine more for refusing to bend, for choosing clarity over comfort. And this wasn't surrendering to public pressure, it was restoring order to a narrative that had spun out of control. Camilla, though, felt a prickle of discomfort she couldn't shake. The media had already begun framing her as the hesitant one, the voice urging restraint. It wasn't entirely accurate, but accuracy had never been the press's favorite currency. She knew how quickly reputational shadows formed, how they stuck, how they whispered behind one's name, and she could feel that shadow curling toward her again. By evening, the palace settled into a silence that didn't soothe, it warned. It wasn't the hush of calm, but the breath held in the center of a gathering storm. The world outside had dimmed for the night, but every corridor inside felt charged with the knowledge that a new chapter of royal life had begun. They had crossed into an age where a single post could ignite chaos, where a whisper could twist into a narrative before dawn. And strangely, that heavy quiet felt earned. The monarchy had finally spoken. Not for reputation, not for tradition, but for its children, two small lives who never asked to be symbol, yet were thrust beneath the fiercest glare history can cast. That winter night, as snow traced soft white lines across London's rooftop, the palace stood more grounded than it had in months. The gates glimmered under street lamps, stone walls held their ancient resolve, and miles away, two young children slept undisturbed, unaware of how their innocence had steadied a storm. For once, the royal tale didn't close with spectacle or scandal, but with something far rarer in their world: clarity. Because sometimes silence isn't dignity, sometimes it's simply fear wearing a crown. And that night, at last, the palace chose courage and found its voice.